Now to take a look at the issue of Joining us now to take a look at the issue of COVID in schools from another perspective is Patrick Donohue. He's the founder and chairman. Joining us now to take a look at the issue of COVID in schools from another perspective is Patrick Donohue. He's the founder and chairman of the Brain Injury Rights Group. So Patrick, you are focusing on a subject that I think is very underreported because it's something that is, quite frankly, kind of appalling when you look at the details of it. But there's allegations that New York City is being accused of defrauding special education students amid this pandemic. How is that?
Well, it's not just New York City, but it's school districts across the country, including New York City, that basically, in our position, has a massive Medicaid RICO fraud. So in essence, school districts across the country receive billions of dollars of Medicaid funds, both federal and state funds, in order to provide services for special needs kids. That's physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, nursing services. And since the pandemic and they closed down schools, they've been collecting the funds, but they haven't been providing the services, which is, it's not only is it criminal in the context of the fraud, but when you think about the harm that's occurring to over 7 million special ed kids across this country, people should be going to jail.
Yeah, and that is just alarming. I mean, it is on top of the issue that many parents are facing in this country right now, which is getting their kids back in school. It seems as if this is something where a lot of people are trying to hope to at least get some type of financial advantage among this, while at the same time not catering to those who perhaps need it the most. Because, for example, a lot of kids in this country, they can do remote learning, but I don't think that's something that you can apply necessarily to a lot of special education students in this country, correct?
Well, it's absurd to think that you could do a year's worth of physical therapy remotely over Skype. And many of these students are nonverbal, non-ambulatory. Some of these kids have cortical visual impairments. So even using a computer screen, or they may not have fine motor skills, it's really atrocious. And listening to your lead up on this is that we've known the science of this since last spring. The CDC original guidelines basically said that schools can close for a couple of weeks while they're preventing the hospital systems from surging. But since last April, we've known the hospital systems are not surging. And the CDC guidelines said if you go outside more than a few weeks, the harm to kids is much greater than the risk of COVID. And what's happened is the science has just reinforced that over the course of the last year. The new CDC director last summer, when she was a professor and advising her local school district up in Massachusetts, advised them that kids can go back to school with 3 feet of social distancing. So it's just atrocious what's occurring for all school kids, and then specifically these special ed kids and their families. I mean, we launched a national class action lawsuit last summer. And it's now being appealed to the Second Circuit, and we're getting ready to launch state-by-state class actions to get the schools reopened for these kids and these families.
And as if parents in this country didn't have enough to do already. I mean, it's so hard, for example, trying to be a parent and at the same time trying to give them a proper education at home because, I mean, they're not teachers. And, I mean, they're already being asked to do so much amid this pandemic. So it does raise the question as to why this is happening. Do you think that this comes back to the teachers' unions, as many people claim? Do you think this comes back to just many teachers maybe being afraid that they're not vaccinated yet or anything like that? Or why do you think it is that there's such a hesitancy to get these children back into the classroom?
Oh, I think there are 4 culprits here. Number one, the politicians who have been weak in the knee to stand up and to support and provide services for these kids. Number 2, the public health officials that have been all over the map when the science has been crystal clear. I mean, last March, the first study that was done out of Wuhan, China, with over 2,000 children under 19 years of age, it showed and demonstrated that this was not a disease that significantly impacted kids. The third is the media. The media has been horrific across the country. The headlines has been basically creating fear. And then the fourth is the teachers' unions and the education leadership. they've been unwilling to stand up. The education leaders have been unwilling to stand up to the teachers union and tell them to get back to school. I mean, this is horrible. I mean, we have one single mom who has 2 autistic kids, and she had to quit her job because she's now tending to her 2 kids because she can't hold down a job and tend to her 2 kids, do the job of an entire team of professionals. This has literally been criminal. And we see now that, I mean, this was all predictable. I mean, if you go back and look last spring, the predictions on the harm that would be happening if schools remain closed, from child abuse to obesity to eating issues to depression to suicide, this is not a surprise. Anybody who was paying attention last spring knew and said that if the schools didn't reopen, you would start to see these things. And the harm that we're going to see, I look at this as the COVID-19 crimes against children. That's what's been occurring. And I look at those 4 key principles as the basis for why these schools are closed.
You know, someday in the future, we're going to look back at this moment and really take a very hard look at what we did wrong. Because, I mean, whether you just laid out so many examples, for example, oftentimes domestic abuse at home isn't really found until a kid goes into the classroom. We were making progress on the opioid epidemic. I know that is now on the rise as well. There are even older students in this country,
Absolutely.
Not to mention the younger ones who are sacrificing developmental issues, but there are older students, too, that the New York Times just did a piece on this, looking at college students who are suffering depression, and they don't really know about what they're going to do moving forward and whether it's something that they can even address in the same way. I mean, across the board, students across this nation have taken a backseat for whatever reason. And this is acknowledging the fact that the CDC guidelines say that in-classroom transmission is virtually non-existent. So where do you think the accountability really begins? Should it start at something like the head of the CDC? Because even when you look in the city of Chicago, for example, the Democratic mayor there, Lori Lightfoot, is saying that teachers unions there are acting like a political party more than they are looking out for the interest of the teachers and even the children in the classroom. So where does accountability start here?
Well, I think the accountability, number one, starts with the political leaders. I mean, from the mayors to governors around the country. They got to look in the mirror. They're the ones at the end of the day who are elected to sift through and all the different special interests. The teachers unions have been, this is not new. I mean, the teachers unions across the country have been advocating for the teachers unions. They don't advocate for children. So this is not like it's something new. It's just what's happened is this COVID experience and crisis has really uncovered the underbelly of what's happening of the education system across our country. And it's really exposed the enormous power that these special interests have as opposed to the parents and our kids. And if you also look, I mean, the other piece of that nobody's really talking about is women in the workforce. I mean, you see this incredible decrease in the impact that it's had on women in the workforce. I mean, we're not going to have to look too far into the future. It's happening right now. We're witnessing history right in front of our eyes, and the political leadership, the public health officials, they should be ashamed of themselves that they're not putting the kids in front of their own personal fears.
Yeah, and you often hear that power is in numbers, but this is one of those situations where it shows that's not necessarily true. Power is evidently with whoever controls that power, whoever has the pocketbooks, things of that nature, because parents across this country, I think, are very frustrated with the way that things are going. I even think many teachers are frustrated with the way things are going, but it's those at the very top of those unions that are preventing them from getting back in the classroom. But Patrick Donohue, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program and really giving a voice to those who maybe don't have the same microphone as other people in the media, because these are such important topics for many people in this country. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate the time and you drawing attention to it.
Of course. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.